Hey everyone, it's your friend and colleague Jesse Green, and you're listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's wonderful to have your company for another episode of our show. Now, in times gone by, when I was a young dentist, to be called an entrepreneur was a slur. It implied that you were money hungry, greedy, didn't care about patients, whatever it is. And if you wanted to insult someone, you would call them an entrepreneur. The problem is, though, entrepreneurs are actually the people that move the economy forward. Entrepreneurs are people that add value beyond what they take. And I actually think being called an entrepreneur these days is a real badge of honor. And I'm joined today by Alan Manly, who is an entrepreneur at his very core, in his DNA. In fact, he's taught entrepreneurs as well by running an MBA program for entrepreneurship. And I'm delighted to be joined by Alan today. So thank you, Alan, for joining us all the way from Sydney. How's things with you today, my friend?
Very good, thank you.
Alan, we were talking a little off here about some of your journey, and you've had quite the ride in your entrepreneurial journey. No doubt there's been ups and there's been downs, but I wanted to start the conversation firstly by trying to understand what an entrepreneur actually is in your own definition, because as I said in the introduction, not that long ago in dentistry, to be considered an entrepreneur was a bit of a slight. Now these days, everyone seems to be an entrepreneur, and I just wanted to get your understanding of what one actually is.
Well, I only have a database of one, being myself. So I can tell you what I think, the burning desire to do better. And to put another way of it, being mindful of your introduction, some entrepreneurs could well be money hungry, but I actually don't think the true entrepreneur cares that much about money. Money is certainly important, and it's a great measure because you have to know if a business is making or losing. That they use money to do that. But I would think the real motivator is to do something your own way. And my wife should you interview my wife, she could tell you what it's like being married to one. Standing in a queue, if someone's serving ice cream, I can't help but work out the workflows of how they could be serving the ice cream better.
Yeah.
And so, but that's not greed or anything. That's a bit of curiosity. It's a bit of ego that you think you could do it better. And you're smart enough to work it out, perhaps. So I think that it's also a massive insecurity complex that you think you have to do better to succeed. It's the sort of person who can't be happy with what they've got. And they can have a very good life or not a good life. Quite a lot of entrepreneurs are still sort of in recovery from poverty or something. I was in recovery from poverty. It was very hard to dismiss that. I was never keen to go back. People would talk of their childhood as fondness, and I just blanked it out and said, forget that. I never want to do that again. So I had a career. I was very fortunate. I had some incredibly good breaks. I got an apprenticeship, which was a life-changing experience. It was a form of education. Then I was at the time when there was a thing called PCs were introduced. Probably half your audience can't even imagine life without a PC and mobile phone. I appreciate that. But you've seen Google. Perhaps they can relate to Google being a big, powerful company that would be great to work for. And if you were in your mid-20s and you'd gone to night school and you got a job at Google, you'd be pretty excited today. Well, I joined a computer company, an American computer company in Australia, and it was like Google. And you worked like crazy and you had golden opportunities and got further educated. And then I became very restless. And I think there's a book called The Entrepreneurial Seizure. Mm-hmm. And that book, I'm sure the guy must have met me. But there's a thing called entrepreneurial seizure where you take the plunge and you give up, wait for it, a perfectly good corporate job where you've been there for nearly 10 years, you're part of the furniture, it is very comfortable. And you suffer this seizure and you resign. And that terminated a marriage. That was one that sort of had a major effect on a marriage. So one moved on and then fumbled around and had a couple of failures. And then being entrepreneurial, being in the computer industry, I fumbled upon a gig as a consultant to a private computing school. And that private computing school taught COBOL, which your audience probably have only heard about in history books. But Medibank, Medicare, whatever the government one is, Medibank, is actually written in COBOL. So it's still around. Yeah. And if you happen to be a COBOL programmer and you're smart enough to do that, and you're leaving university, you'll get 1.5 times the salary you expect if you're prepared to work for Medicare and code in COBOL, because you'll never get another job. So it's a legacy system. So that little tiny school in the suburb of Burwood, then I was blessed with a Chinese godfather, would you believe? And the next thing, there was these Chinese students in Australia, and thousands upon thousands of them. So I filled in all the government forms and got permission to have international students. And that took me on a different journey. It took me into really an entrepreneurial flair of getting a tiny little college that barely made a buck. Yeah, we'd make wages. That's it. And that's possibly what the sentence of a dentist, I imagine, would be: you make good wages.
Yeah.
That's comfortable. But what a lost opportunity, perhaps. That, not saying anything against dentistry, but if you had another facet to your personality, you could provide better for your family. And so I then built up that business. Cutting a long story short, 30 years later, so I'm not young, 30 years later, it was the sixth biggest MBA school in Australia out of 100. And we had thousands, several thousand, always more than 2,000, of international students. And we would have graduations at the Sydney Opera House. And guests, we had the appropriate guests and that sort of thing. So I built up the marketing image of this institution. I was always driven by trying to do it better, always driven. And so what drives the entrepreneur? Well, my wife says it's an insecurity. Very harsh, probably. I have spoken to a lot of entrepreneurs, and they really are running away from something, most likely. And it can be self-doubt. They want to prove it to themselves. And they prove it to themselves in a forum. And it's a great forum. And you get measured. And being an entrepreneur, you can always say it's not about the money. So, I've said that several times to millions of dollars going out the back door. It's not about the money. It's a learning experience.
It's
a Chinese
really
gentleman told me once that you can't lose money in business. And I said, oh, really? I said, I think I might have. He said, oh, no. He says, it's an education. Lifelong education is you're in business and you lose money, you're more educated. Right, I said. So I actually regard myself as highly educated now.
Highly educated, yeah. Well, there you go. It's a really interesting point you make about entrepreneurialism. And there's a couple of threads of conversation I want to pick up there with you, Alan, because you've actually given me, as a podcaster, you've given me so many conversational threads. I'm very grateful for you. You've made my job really easy. What I want to ask about, though, is the essential qualities of an entrepreneur, because I think what you've just described as an insecurity, I totally relate to. As I said, when I was called an entrepreneur, and it was a label that was not given out as a compliment, it implied certain things. And I really resented those implications, because my thinking about entrepreneurialism is it's a form of creativity. And for me, business is my art. I have no musical talent. I have no ability to draw or to sketch or to paint or to sculpt or any of those sort of traditional artistic pursuits. But when it comes to business, that's for me my canvas. That's what I like to create on. That's how I like to do things. And to the point where you say running away from something, I absolutely identify with that. I grew up in a family where there's a lot of love, but not a lot of money. And it was always a source of stress and anxiety that lives with me today. And I am not driven to have more money, but I'm driven to not go back there. And I think that's kind of what you spoke about. And it's a very visceral thing. And we need to make sure our wives never meet, because they will have a great time dissecting our personalities, I am sure. Because my wife always says to me, it's okay to stop. It's like this invisible hand that kind of pushes you along. And it's very hard to explain that to someone who's not actually trying to escape something. And so I absolutely resonate with what you're sharing there. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people in this environment listening to this podcast who may have had the similar experience. Maybe they're running away from something, but there'll be a whole bunch of people that aren't. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about running away versus running towards, because I feel like they're two different energies. And, you know, one's running away from the darkness, the other one running towards the light. Do you see many entrepreneurs running towards the light, or do you think most of them are running away from the darkness?
I think the threshold is, there's something that drives them to the threshold. They want to do better. And if you think of those people moving away from something in the past, they usually do strive quite hard. They're not always entrepreneurial. They may strive academically, and they write endless papers and they travel the world giving papers. And having an education institution, I met an enormous number of academics. And a lot of them were second or third generation academics. And the person they wanted to outsmart was mum or dad.
Yeah.
And that was to prove it to themselves. It wasn't done with venom. It was just a bit of an ego thing that, geez, you know, I can't possibly be an associate professor when Dad was a professor. I've got to keep writing. And they contributed enormously. But when you got to know them, you knew that it was Mum that was the shadow.
Yes.
But once they've done that, the entrepreneur, of course, doesn't do that. The entrepreneur goes into business. And then that's the doing type thing. And it's possibly, it's a broader field, because you can be an entrepreneur in almost anything.
Absolutely.
Almost. So when I was writing articles about it, I would try and put it down to the basics. In the book, it's hidden away there, the three main things of business. And you end up talking about business, because that's the forum for an entrepreneur.
Yes.
I talk about, and I gave some lectures occasionally, the three things in business is cash flow, and cash flow.
Yep.
And it does so much for you, and it gives you so much freedom. And people would rush off into an accounting course and how to read annual reports. And I still fumble, but I've done a couple of videos of Warren Buffett, who no doubt could read annual reports, but didn't read all of them. You only read the assets part. And if you're running it, you need the cash flow. And I remember having a business that was tens of millions of dollars, quite a medium-sized business. It was larger than a small cap on the stock exchange. So we had a CFO, and things were a bit tight. And I said, drama, this is going to be challenging. He said, don't you worry about anything. Just keep the cash coming in. I'll sort out the problems. And it just confirmed everything. If you've got enough cash for the payroll and enough cash for the tax department, you're still in the business.
Absolutely.
And there might be creditors around the back, and you haven't bought a new car, and you haven't done this, you haven't done that, and all the equipment needs upgrading. Oh, you'd say, don't worry about that. Just give me the cash flow. All that can be done. He said, you just concentrate on getting more cash in the door. And that everything starts with the customer, doesn't it? It's all about customers.
So it's really interesting you mentioned that. I'm a bit of a Peter Drucker fan, and I'm a voracious reader. And that said, I'm also a serial dipper into books. Sometimes I'll read a chapter, then not read the rest of the book for whatever reason. But one of Peter Drucker's more famous quotes is, the purpose of a business is to create and to keep a customer, which is essentially what you've spoken about. Now, you've got some skills around marketing. You don't build a business like that without being half decent at marketing. So I wanted to ask you how you developed your marketing now. So how did you learn that skill? Is it something that you just kind of got good at through trial and error?
I was trained by an American computer company. And so I went to the States and went to some courses at Harvard. And there were sort of snippets of a Harvard MBA course, but you did 1 month at a time. And I did a couple of days. And there was always marketing. The division I was in always did marketing type courses. And they constantly kept talking. Their thing being probably the most wonderful marketing culture on earth is America.
Yes.
And so, interestingly enough, just to digress a tiny bit, if you look at America's culture, they're all refugees. None of them want to go back. Think about it. You've got a hordes of them, wave after wave of all sorts of things from the Pilgrim Fathers. None of them want to go back. So nationally, culturally, they all want to go forward.
Yep.
So you've got the most hyped up entrepreneurial group on earth. None of them, in fact, most of them can't go back for a million reasons, all sorts of cultural reasons, religious reasons, all sorts of things. So you've got a nation of refugees. So they really wound up to keep going forward. And they were obsessed with customers. Yes. And when I got into the education business, I noted one experience that etched its way in my mind. I must remember not to say the university. But my wife was doing an MBA, a Master of Business Administration, at a university near where our college was. And she's in this queue for 2 hours waiting to pay her fees. And so she rings me in those days, mobile phones had just come in. So I had a mobile phone, of course, being an entrepreneur. So I had this flashy mobile. She rings me and says, you've got to come in this queue. I need to go to the toilet. And so I can't go out. If you go out, you don't get your spot saved. So I scampered around. I ran around the corner. And 10 minutes later, I'm in there and she gives me this little ticket and I stand in the queue. Night was for night school for MBA. So it was about 60, 70% girls, comparable age to myself. So I'm standing in the queue with all these girls, you see. And my wife comes back, and one of the funnier experiences of my life, the girl behind her, a very nice girl, says, excuse me, can I borrow your boyfriend? I thought, gee, I've seen movies like this. You can borrow it. This could be all right. Says, I need to go to the toilet. So I stood in queue for her, and you can guess I was passed down the queue. Can you believe I was used by these females as a ticket holder?
And loved it.
Loved every minute of it. But what I learned, that was in a queue for an organisation that was charging a lot of money for a master's in business administration. Linger on the last word. They couldn't administer getting money.
No.
The queue. And then later on, fast forward, my wife's now finished. And this is many years ago. And so they sent this really nice letter to her. Would you like to join the alumni? So why would I want to join an organisation that treated me like that? She never forgave them. Then I own an education institution. And so students would pay, or pay was good pay. They'd come back and ask 100 questions. What's next week's timetable or something? And there'd be queues. And I used to think, every time I saw a queue, I used to think, that's going to be like my wife in the queue. They're going to hate our guts.
Yeah.
Then only about 5 years ago, life's gone on. It's now a much bigger organisation. It's employing 100 plus people. And I walk out from my suite, only a really nice office. I walk out and I see this queue. I said, there's another queue. I thought I had everything online. But no, there's a queue developed. Some good-hearted person had decided if students, it was international students predominantly, 90% international students. International students wanted to have leave. They had to fill in a form online. Good, I thought that's good. And then I would interview them to make sure that they were genuine. So, right. So the queue took 2 hours to cycle through, which is a long time. I said, well, how do you decide that they're genuine? Well, they're taking leave and there's visas involved, there's immigration department, there's the education department, got all these regulators. Yeah, got it. Good. Yeah. So how do you, well, I hear their story. When do you do that? Well, then I decided they're telling the truth. I said, right. And how good are you at telling the truth from someone from a different culture? And how do we double check this? Well, we don't. I make the decision. Right, I says, okay, so you do that. And well, let's look back at the decisions the last 6 months. Have you ever knocked anyone back from getting leave? Oh, no, she says, no, I believe in being fair. Right. So we get them to catch a train, to form a queue for 2 hours for you to say yes. Oh, well, but I've spoken to them. I know they're telling the truth. So if they lied to us, would we care? They've got a contract with the immigration department. They've got a contract with the administration. They're a student. They know you. So we put it online, you get big tick box. And if you look at businesses that have got queues, everywhere you see a queue, you see dissatisfied customers.
Yes.
And every time you have to repeat something, if an appointment doesn't work, I was thinking, since we made the arrangement to have this interview today, I've been to the dentist, my good long-suffering dentist, as I term him. And he's an avid reader of my book, not the entrepreneurial one, actually the court case one.
Yep.
And I noticed he's caught up with time. You make an appointment, ring up, make an appointment. And a nice lady says, then you get something on your phone that says confirming your appointment, then it's in your dates and that. And I thought to myself, yep. He only has ever one person waiting. And it's like it's scheduling. So we've known each other for 30 years. We always have a bit of a chat, but I always make sure there's no one in the waiting while we're chatting. Once I see someone come out of the corner of my eye, time's up. He's back to work. I think queues. I'm obsessed about queues. I think if you've got queues or people waiting for something, you're disenchanting a customer.
I think there's a lot in there, and that's going to come back to, again, ladies and gents, if you're listening to that, look at those friction points. And what Alan, I think, is really saying, if I was to chunk it up, is to make it easy to do business. Make it easy. Remove those friction points, remove the headaches, remove the frustrations, and in this case, queues. But make it easy, because people want easy. I wanted to talk to you for a second, Alan, as well, because you said something in your opening as well about dentists being condemned to wages. And I think that's a really interesting point, because many dentists are condemned to wages. They're working for wages. They're not really running a true business. And we talk about the stages of growth of a dental practice, and it's not dissimilar to the stages of growth of any business. You've got your startup phase, your growth phase, your scaling up phase, and ultimately an exit phase. Why is it that you think that many small businesses, and obviously you came from a larger or medium-sized enterprise, why is it you think many smaller businesses struggle to make the leap into something that has more leverage, more scalability, so that they are working for business profits rather than simply wages? What holds people back?
I was asked a question one time when I now become successful. And so I was being interviewed by people, and it was a public forum. And they said, did you find going from opening a small business to a medium-sized business? They said large, but it's really medium-sized business. Did you find that overwhelming? I said, no. I said, I'd been trained to run a medium-sized business. It was like a branch of an operation. I was a branch executive. And so imagine corporates have branches, and I had a little baby branch. So it had all the characteristics of a big operation. And the organisation would be turning over a lot of money and a lot of people. So I was trained to do that. So I found remembering to switch the lights off at night and all that, the boring part of it, I was waiting for it to get to be big enough so I could lead a team. And I found that easy. I think that the difference between people who go to, for instance, your clientele, they go to university and they're obviously gifted, they're bright, but they haven't been taught business.
No,
And
not
sadly, and I know the time you were talking about when you were starting, because I knew my dentist at the time, and he is an entrepreneur, and he would join some entrepreneurs organisation, and then Alan Bond collapsed financially. And he said,
Yes.
man, you couldn't get people to show up to an entrepreneurs meeting. They expected the police to rock up. So it was really emotionalised that entrepreneurs were bad. And that was a pity in a lot of ways. But now I think with the gig economy, entrepreneurs are now in Bible. To get to your point, what is the hardest bit to go from small to large? I think that is the barrier. A lot of it is confidence, inability to delegate. And the inability to delegate, my belief, is because they don't have procedures.
Yes.
If they put they're incredibly intelligent. You've got one of the most intelligent audiences you can imagine. If you do an IQ test on it, none of them will fail. But if they applied that IQ to procedures, when the phone rings, what happens? And I guess in some ways they find that a bit demeaning. I found setting up a business, you're basically a bottle washer, and you've got college is like running a hotel. As a matter of interest, very much like a hotel. A lot of people swarm into rooms, and then swarm out, and they all do it at once, slamming doors and overloading toilets, and lifts jam, and it's very exciting moving. It's like herding cattle. So having to do that, I found that a little annoying at times. But I really used to enjoy working out the process that if you're a student customer and you applied to do something, how could we have it that we never spoke to you? How could we have it that we had nothing to do with you? And the challenge there, you've got dentists who've probably got some charms and some great skills, engineering skills. Imagine dealing with teachers who like talking to people. There's nothing better than having a good chat to a student about what subjects they should select again. And what's wrong with doing it again? For God's sake, get him to choose it right in the first place.
Get it done.
Get it done.
Rework is the most expensive work, right?
So there was a constant clash. And then on the human side, there's some people who talk a lot to students, can get themselves into a lot of distraction. Far better to keep a professional distance. So I used to be constantly thinking, we used to watch movement of people. We had cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
And I guess every business does these days, but we were pretty early to introduce cameras so we could watch traffic flow, foot traffic, and see where they're going and where they're congregating with our staff, talking to them. So it was a bit of a clash for people who were from a university where measurement is different.
That's a great point, because one of the challenges that practice owners will typically have is that they might actually be quite business focused and business oriented, and yet their employed dentists or associate dentists are not. And don't tell me how to do my job. Don't tell me how to do my art. In your case, don't tell me how to teach this subject, Alan. Yeah, I'm the one in front of the class. Don't tell me how to do my craft. How did you approach that from the point of view of allowing the teachers or the presenters, lecturers to be themselves, but also to work within the operational guidelines that you have as an organisation? So you've got repeatability and consistency, and in your case, timeliness to get through the work in a prescribed time frame.
Well, it's a really good question. The concept we put in was timeliness. You can control timeliness. You can lead by example with timeliness. I was always early for work, and I left late, and I was always on time for meetings. Now, that meant a lot because I found that lecturers can become slack. And in fact, it's a trap for them, a professional trap. That they become very friendly with the students.
Yes.
And they can be 10 minutes late for a lecture, and they can charm the students that it was a really funny traffic jam. And lecturers are basically thespians.
Yes.
More than half of them are thespians.
Yes.
And they're very good at it. The best lecturers are show ponies.
It's a complete performance, right?
It is. So I had a dean who I learned a lot from, and he was a musician, a very successful musician. And he was running an orchestra and such. It was about timing. You've really got to get it together, guys. You've got to rock up and practice. Yes. And you've got to do it. And it's a lot to do with timing, he told me. Music's a lot to do with timing. I said, probably. So I would have it that they had to be in the classroom 10 minutes early. The operation I had, you wore a collar and tie because we were trying to get the students to understand that in business, probably that was a safe ground. Yes. And you have opinions on that, but it's very successful with parents, I can assure you that, because who was my audience? My customer was the parents.
Of course.
We're in a third world country, who are the emerging rich in a third world country. They still believe that successful people wore suits. So we had the electors in seats. They'd have to be suited up, and they entered it was a high-rise building. When they came out of the lift, they had to be ready for work. They didn't go and have a shower and push the bike around. So that timeliness, I then started to value their time. And it wasn't patronising so much as, what do you do? Well, you do the thespian thing, and a lot of fun there. When COVID came, they were online, and some adapted really well and some not so well. We had to run lessons for people who hadn't moved their arms when they were on camera, so they were interesting. But then I worked out that they were putting a lot of time in. And some were charging, some weren't. It depends on their contract. It was a shambles type thing. But I did work out some of the timing they were doing. It was very nice of them to do it, but it was a waste of time. Now, why isn't it automated? Why don't you tell me what you do? So, with COVID and such, a lot of things became online for education, and we accelerated that. We were one of the first to really jump into it. So all the background work that people do, we tried to automate, and I imagine there's some people offering packages that do that. But if there's any background work other than thespian, we'll call the dentist the thespian when you've got the victim in the chair. That's showtime. You shouldn't be doing anything else. It should be automated, and that's where you can save a fortune. And those 20 minutes a day always remind me of Toyota, where they're in this constant improvement thing. I mean, they're talking of minutes, they're talking of seconds, and they reward staff on the production environment if they can think of any new idea.
Yeah.
And I was constantly on that. That made us, dare I boast, quite a lot of money, because the teachers liked us. They weren't instantly in love with the idea. They were all terrified they wouldn't get paid. We were happy to pay them more for their theatre than we were for their bookwork. And they weren't that good at bookwork anyway, to be really honest. They were overeducated to doing what they were doing. This thing about marking and such, you didn't have to mark everything. You reviewed the marking. You used that high IQ to review the marks. And you would do the distribution curves. You would analyse that. We'd do all that automatically. Then a lecturing high IQ would add value. That distribution curve was caused, it's moved left or it's moved right. There's a reason for that. We didn't get the exam results we expected. And we had two criteria, as you can imagine. You've got student criteria, you've got our criteria, what we want. And we would keep moving to those internal goals, but getting rid of the back office. Well, I constantly say, on the other interview I did, was how do you make money out of education? I said, avoid education, just do the admin. There's no money in education.
Okay, well, that kind of makes sense on one level, but not on another. So I'll ask you to explain it a bit further, because the education is the customer, right? So without the customer, how are you making money?
We keep the customer happy. It didn't matter what they're doing. You keep the customer happy. Education was just a sideline. Then you employ these thespians, really nice, actually usually very nice people. That was also one of the weaknesses. They were very nice people, and some of them weren't really driven to do things efficiently. They were so nice they'd spend all day chatting. Yeah. So we marshalled them together by the timing issue. Everything had to be on time. So they had to get out into the classroom. That was another thing we did. So you get in the classroom early and you leave on time. So that stopped the ambling around. And so it got a bit more discipline. If they wanted to make an appointment with the student, of course, there's people that do that. There's always counselling. You've got to have a counselling process. That's formalised. So as to the teaching, did I take an interest in the teaching? I was interested in being entrepreneurial. Occasionally I do an entrepreneurial lecture about being an entrepreneur. That's just a matter of talking about yourself. That's not hard. The customer for us, probably dentists have it too. If you have children, the customer is probably the parents.
Absolutely, it's parents.
So we always aimed. And I did a couple of readings on stakeholders, because education's a very broad thing. You've got the student, which of course is number one, but parents make the decision. Other people do too. The community makes decisions. We had a college, wait for this one, in Redfern.
Okay.
And it was a big tower. It used to be the TNT towers in Redfern for those.
I know exactly where the road splits.
Yeah, and there was two towers, and we had the naming rights on both, and we occupied one for 10 years. And I changed the name of the building to GCA, Group Colleges Australia, and it cost $60,000 a year in naming rights. And I was very proud of this. This was a highlight of my career. And I was in a taxi one day going to Redfern. It's a bit of a hill, would you believe? And I said, look, once you get over this hill, mate, you'll see the building there. You'll see the GCA towers. He said, oh, yeah, the TNT towers. I said, yes, the TNT towers. They're the ones. They're going $60,000 a year for 5 years. And no one had noticed the change.
That's an education, Alan. That's the education right there.
Oh, yeah, so much for that. A lot of people did like it, though. But
Yeah.
Redfern, we had to think about the stakeholders. Who are our stakeholders? We're going to flood this building with what was 5,000 students. They don't all come at once, but they do come. So we are now an imposter in the culture, and we figured that this Redfern has possibly got an Aboriginal culture. We had a hunch about that. And so we figured that the locals will have to be appeased. So it's a worthwhile story, I hope, that we had a big opening. We had politicians, we had academics, we had everything you can imagine. It was a big opening. Press, everyone was there, because it's a big deal for Redfern. Yep. And so I rang up the local land council and I said, look, I need someone to do a welcome to building or country, whatever you're calling it. He said, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. He said, oh, yeah, I've got just a minute for you. So there we are. And so we're all going through the speeches, and I felt a bit bad that Uncle Max hadn't been included, and yet he'd done the opening, you see. So I said to the nice man running the land council, I said, you reckon we could have Uncle Max say a word or two? You think he'd be up for that, or would he feel uncomfortable? I said, I have to ask him. He said, I have to ask him. I said, okay. Comes back and, no, look, Max says he's okay with it. I said, oh, okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're proud to introduce Uncle Max, who's the nice man that did all this. So I built it up a bit to try and make him feel better. And I'm nearly 6 foot tall. Max was closer to 5 foot tall. Yeah. Comes up to the podium, 2 microphones, pulls the 2 microphones down to his voice. This is not the sign of a man who needs much help from me. And Max then tells us that he'd opened the Opera House. Right. Met the Queen 4 or 5 times. Right.
Oh, wow.
Met 4 or 5 presidents of the United States. Right. Opened the new Parliament House, as you call it. Right. I was helping him. Oh, really? So having done that, and to finish that story, I then had to follow him. Joy, total joy. What a letdown I was. But with having done that, worked out who our stakeholders were, we never had any graffiti on any buildings in Redfern. We had no cars vandalised. We had nothing damaged whatsoever. Any graffiti was never done on our building. We had got Max on site. And it's very hard sometimes to know who your stakeholders are. But we fumbled and we got it. And we never had any issues. And at times there were social issues there that were impacting businesses. We were immune. We couldn't believe it. We could leave Mercedes-Benz cars parked in Redfern untouched.
Wowzers.
And to know who your stakeholders are. And sometimes it's someone, my point being, I guess, long story, but getting they're sometimes out in the left field. It's when you see these dentists popping up in the neighbourhood with their shingle next to the front gate, I wonder if they've really got any community involvement. And if you can get involved rightly, I'm not an expert at it, but we got involved a little bit in the community. And then to finish involved in the community, the local football team was called Souths.
Yeah, the Rabbitohs.
So the Rabbitohs. So we became sponsors. And we were not big sponsors. But I tell you what, we were spoiled sponsors. We'd won their heart, and to grovel to them. The Towers, right? And the Rabbitohs looked like they could be premiers. So I put Rabbitohs flags all around the building. And needless to say, we got a letter from the council to say that you're not supposed to put flags all around the building. I had banners everywhere. I got some PR out of it.
So there's a lot in that. The stakeholders piece is really interesting, and there's a couple of things around the story about Max as well. As you say, knowing who your stakeholders are, and they might not be immediately obvious, is a really important lesson for everyone. What I also was reflecting on there was sometimes we make assumptions about things, and I remember there's a great story of, I'm a Beatles fan, and John Lennon was performing with Yoko. This is post-Beatles. And he and Little Richard were on the same bill and they're arguing about who should close the show. And eventually Lennon won out and said, no, I'm going to close the show. So Little Richard goes out and just tears up the stage and just delivers this knockout performance. And the audience is screaming and dancing and having a great time. He walks off stage and says to Lennon, follow that. And I imagine that's probably a little bit how you felt following Max, who had just met the Queen 5 times, met all the presidents. You're like, oh my God, how do I follow that? So you're quite right. We need to understand who those stakeholders are. And interestingly as well, you're talking about with the college and understanding the thespian nature of your teachers. And I think to bring that back to the dentists and what they're dealing with in their practice, you're absolutely right. There is always an element of performance. And in dentistry, it's no different. You go into the treatment room and you're on show. You are performing. You, of course, are doing your clinical thing, but there's a huge performance element around that as well. And one of the things I think young dentists miss today is that thespian element of what they do and understanding that they are on show, and it's not just delivering information in a deadpan way. I don't want to use the word entertainment because I don't want to sound like I'm trivializing what they do, but there needs to be an engagement piece with what they do. And it sounds like your teachers did that really well. It reminds me of a story really quickly, Alan. When I was in the Navy as a dentist, I had a wonderful boss. His name was Bob Game, and unfortunately Bob passed away a few years ago. I would go to these ships, and my first ship I ever went on was HMAS Brisbane, and Bob said to me, Jesse, I really don't care how much dentistry you do. You obviously got to do some, but I'm not really that interested. What I'm interested in is how well you relate to everyone else on the crew, because your number one job is to make sure that you get us invited back onto this ship and to pave the way for other people to go on other ships. And so I wanted to ask you this point around the balance between service delivery and performance, because you touched on it. And I think that that's a really important point that a lot of people miss. So the kind of the wrapping that goes around the actual product. And in your case, you've got teachers who can stand and conduct the orchestra, so to speak. In my case, I was out at sea trying to do my own version of that, and of course in the treatment room. But why do you think that's such an important part of business?
The foundation of your business, whilst the customer is number one, you have to have a product that they value. And you may have to sell it to them. But
Yes.
I can remember when I was working for the sales guy, one of the guys said, look, if you can't think of anything else to talk about in our computers, tell the truth. He said, even if it's not the best truth, tell the truth. He said, everyone knows the thing. It's only a computer. It won't be everyone's dream. He said, just tell the truth. Always try and tell the truth. He said, now, the product with an MBA is a wonderful product to sell. Absolutely wonderful. It's basically the work ticket for entrepreneurs. And to give you an idea, when I get customers, it was very simple. It was the emerging wealth in developing countries called India and China, predominant, and every other country in Asia. But that was the big source. So these people are emerging middle-class people. They are aspirational. And I would tell the story, my stump speech was always the same. Probably, I worked at about 6 generations ago, my family couldn't read and write. And then education was introduced in the mid-1800s, et cetera, and literacy. So I stand on the shoulder of my forefathers, and just like we all do. So that got familiarity with them, and they related to that. And the next opportunity is to see further. And if you send your kids to Australia, they'll see over the hill. And then we will teach them the skills to run a business, any business. So if you've got some business in Pakistan or India or whatever, we think that when your child comes back, we can genuinely look you in the face and say, they will know more about business than if they didn't come. And they'll know more about international business. So if you've got a good product, you can really get pretty excited about it. And sometimes you can let your hair down and say, I hope you're all millionaires or something. They'd laugh at that. Deep down, it was always true. And if you're a dentist and you're relieving pain and you're doing or cosmetics, which is a lot of dentistry now I read, if you're doing that, you can be really proud of it.
Really?
There's no evil in it. There's no bad in it. If you do a good job, if you've got the technical skills to do that, you can be proud of it. And sometimes I think, I would imagine, I've been to a number of dentists, I guess. Sometimes I don't think they're proud of it. They're conscientious, but they don't show the pride in it. And they say, that job I've just done, you probably can't see this, but you are going to have a better time eating food. Yeah, it's not hard for them to say, oh, thank God for that. You won't believe what I've been through. Oh, yeah, we'll do just get you out of the chair. Okay. But I think it's got a good product. I think that's why I'm happy to be involved when you talk about dentistry. It's a high moral ground thing. Dentists could be, from my experience on occasions where I've had emergency dentist type work, they could be prouder. I think that it's possibly a shyness. Highly intellectual people are often shy. They're probably got a shyness. They probably think you don't appreciate them. I know that most faces they see are one of fear, that they're scared of what pain you're going to inflict upon them. My dentist is a bit brutal, I think. He says, this will hurt, but not much.
If you've known him a long time, he's probably taking a little bit of creative license with you as well.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I think one of the things that comes up around that, Alan, is sometimes dentists don't value the actual work that they do and they think it's commonplace. In the past, when I was a younger dentist, I've had to overcome this and to learn this. You do some work for someone, you might have transformed their smile or done whatever, and they're having a very emotional response and thanking you and doing all those sorts of things. And in a moment of awkwardness or a moment of perhaps not appreciating the impact that your treatment has on someone, you kind of go, oh, it's nothing, it's fine. And you kind of downplay it. And equally, I think for some people, it's also not wanting to feel salesy, like recoiling from all of those sorts of emotions. So I think there's something in there. So ladies and gents, you do great work. Be proud of it and be happy to tell people that they're going to have a better experience or better life or better functionality or what it is as a result of the treatment you do. And be proud. Stand up tall, shoulders back, chest out, the whole thing, because you do. You make a difference. Alan, in terms of making a difference, you've made a huge difference with your educational colleges and the work you do, the books you write. And I haven't even had the chance to really talk about the book so much, The Unlikely Entrepreneur. But ladies and gents, I would encourage you to grab a copy of it. Please get a copy and read it, because there'll be so many lessons in there, so many life lessons, because I actually think running a business is the greatest form of personal development, that and being married and having kids, all three. Alan, you've been exceedingly generous with your time today and your wisdom and your knowledge. And I want to say thank you on behalf of our audience for coming on to the program and sharing your insights and your experiences. So thank you, mate.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, it's Jesse here. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. If you're looking for some more tools, some more insights, some more inspiration to help you create a practice that you love, as well as a life that you love, well, head across to savvydentist.com and check out all the goodies that we have there waiting for you right now.